Welcome, everybody, to your free GMAT Prep Hour. It is October 29th, 2024. It's 2 days before Halloween. If I were really planning ahead, I could have worn a costume, but I didn't. And that always seems kind of weird when, a lot of people watch these recordings and it's not Halloween anymore. So it always comes off a little strange. Um, to those that are here live, welcome. We have some international presence, some people from the UK, and someone has joined from Pakistan. So they're actually up at 5 a.m. to attend this session. And it is October 30th for them. They're a day ahead. To those that are watching on YouTube, thanks for being here. Hope you get something out of this. If you're looking for other free prep options, we have them. Just a reminder, you can try the first session of our GMAT course for free. I often say that you might as well go to that even if you have no intention of signing up for the course. We talk about some really big stuff in class one. You might as well get that free content. Don't tell my company I said that, but there's no reason not to take that opportunity and take basically 1 out of 9 classes free of charge. You can do a similar thing with our online self-paced study course. That, again, similar material, free of charge, get a sample, see if it entices you to buy the rest, but even if it doesn't, you get some free materials from us. We also offer Foundations of GMAT Math workshops. We do those typically twice a month. We have 2 workshops, the Foundations of Math Computations, which is like math with numbers, and the Foundations of Math Variables, which is like math with variables, algebra, and whatnot. We offer typically 1 of each a month. Sometimes we'll offer 2 of each a month. I think we're doing that in December, so keep an eye out for those. We also have basically the full library of recorded free GMAT prep hours. And at this point, we have dang near exhausted everything big that there is to talk about. Me and my fellow teachers are constantly texting each other like, what are you going to talk about next? What else is there to do? We've really covered the big stuff. We'll keep finding more and more niches to cover. But if you're looking for, if you're looking to study on a budget, you can get basically a full course load of material from these videos. We've really hit all the major things and a lot of the minor things as well. It's really an exhaustive resource for you. So I'd encourage you to look through that. Today, we are continuing a series I've started and run for a few months here. We're going to just basically pull up some of the questions that you get when you sign up for the GMAT for free. MBA.com, you sign up. They will give you a library of kind of sample questions. It's like 80 questions or so of the various question types that the test has for you to figure out how that question type works. And since these are free and since everyone gets them, I kind of figured it would be a good idea to have a video series on how a GMAT nerd like me, who's done this for a decade at this point, might handle these questions at first glance. So I have not done these questions. I likely have never seen these questions. And so you will kind of see me work through them for the first time. And I've, as you will see, if you watch the other videos in the series, I get some right, but I also miss some, and I definitely get flustered. So I think it's just a good example of, someone who's good at this isn't always perfect and will make mistakes. We do similar things with full practice tests. If you look for our Twitch the GMAT series, you'll see some of my colleagues taking the test, taking sections of the test, working through it live in front of you, showing you and telling you what they think and how they're working, and you'll see that they also make mistakes. The GMAT is kind of designed to make sure that you make mistakes. It's part of the fun of the test. For more on that, attend our first class because we go in depth on how the GMAT works and how its grading system functions. And that's obviously important information for any studier to have. Today, we are working on the graph and table questions in the data insights section. And after this, there'll only be 1 question type left, the multi-source reasoning questions. So graphs and tables, kind of similar question types on data insights. They're going to put a data source in front of you. It's either going to be a table of information or it's going to be a graph of some kind. And it's kind of similar process here, just some general tips for dealing with graph and table questions, right? First thing you want to do is just get a sense of what the data tells you at a very general level, right? Get a general sense of what the data is showing you. Okay, don't be overwhelmed by the volume of data. They can really throw a lot at you in these questions, right? And if you feel like you have to understand every single piece, you're going to be overwhelmed by the stuff that's there. You just want a general sense of what the volume of what the data tells you. Don't look at everything, and then use the questions as a fence post for what to look for. Okay. So we're going to get a sense of how what the data is presenting. We're going to look at the question, see what question I need to answer about that data. Then we can use that as a fence post to work through the graph or the table and answer what is asked. All right. Yeah, I mean that's the general process here. Tables are pretty straightforward. Graphs have a little bit more variety. You'll get graphs that look like graphs you're used to. It's a line graph, it's a bar graph, and you're reading the data. Uh, or sometimes the GMAT will give you unusual graphs or even graphs that are a visual representation that they've kind of made up, and you have to really take some time to understand what that representation means. And that is often a big part of the question. You don't want to rush understanding what the data is showing you. That's often where the difficulty lies. There's also a really common tendency in these GMAT problems to ask about information that can't be directly gleaned from the data source itself. You need to make an inference based on the data set. So if a question is asking about some data that's not in the information, it's asking about some quantitative value that the graph or table doesn't give you. It's the game is that you can take the data they give you and infer the data for the question that is asked. It's also worth noting that you do have a 4-function calculator for the data insight section, including for graph and table questions. Having said that, I try to avoid it at all costs. That calculator is on the screen, and you have to click your mouse around to work it, and that's just cumbersome and slow. And if you mistype something, you have to start over, and it's just a pain. So I try to avoid the calculator, but you do have it if for some reason the calculations are ugly and you just want to hammer it out real quick. Okay. So with that in mind, let's just get this started and we'll work through these here. So I've selected the data insights graphs and the data insights table from the official starter kit hub on MBA.com. I'm going to do unlimited and untimed for now. Although when you are studying, I do recommend using a clock and making sure you're choosing answers in a GMAT pace. But I'm going to be stopping, kind of explaining what I'm seeing and how I'm working through this. Okay, so question 1 of 5. There's not very many of these. That's surprising. But this is okay, so this is a good example of a graphic question. And it's also a good example of one of those graphs that seem to be unusual, right? Like this doesn't look like a graph I'm used to seeing. So I'm going to read about the story first. It shows in 3-column grouping various divisions of Earth's geologic history since its formation 46,000 million years ago. Okay, so we're doing something about geologic history in this graph. We have millions of years. Looks like here's the 46,000 million years ago. So this is the beginning of time, and then it goes up. I'm noticing that number changes. It starts here, 46,000, and then here it goes to 600. And here it goes to 65. Okay, so I'm just curious about that. In the leftmost grouping, the Precambrian eon is divided into, I don't know what that word is, chronometric, seems like something to do with time, chrono, but whatever. I'm not even going to worry about it. Shown on the far left, but otherwise, each subsequent column to the right shows the subdivisions of the time frame to its left. Each of the rightmost 2 columns groupings is a magnification with additional information of a port. Okay, so what this graph is doing is it's zooming in. So we start here with like a full 4,600 million years, but then we zoom in here to the top 600 million years, and we get a little more detail about that, right? So the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic are here, and they're here. And then here we're zooming in at the last 65 million years. The purple, the tertiary period, All right. Okay, great. So I think I've got enough. Like I'm not going to worry about more than that, right? I see what this graph is doing. It's giving something about geologic information, and each subsequent graph zooms in deeper into the story. Okay. So the Miocene epoch spans closest to blank of the era of which it is part. So the Miocene epoch. So here's the Miocene epoch. And I want to say that it spans closest to blank of the area. And let's see what these answers are. They're percents. Okay, these answers are percents of the era that it is part of. So the Miocene I can see takes up a big percent. Well, let's see. The era. Okay, so I want to make sure it's not eon. Right, the eon is the tertiary, I think. The era. Oh my. Now I'm a little uncertain. Um, it's in the Cenozoic era. So, okay, I'm noticing this is harder than I thought it was going to be, right? I thought my first thought was like, okay, it's going to be this out of this. But this is a period, right? This isn't an era. It's actually, so it's basically here we got 5 to 20. It's basically 20 million years out of, this looks like about 80 million years. So I'm going to say it's about 25%. And that's an answer. That was a lucky estimation there. But just to reiterate what I did there, right? The trap is to say, oh, it's this out of this. And that's a lot. That's like 85%, right? This whole thing. But that's not actually the question. We want to know what that is out of this whole era. And so I figure that this whole era is about 80 million years, just based on that timeline there as a rough estimation. And this is looked to be about 20 million years. So I said 20 out of 80. Okay, so see, notice the trap there. Notice the temptation to jump to an easy solution when there's extra steps to be careful, extra steps, extra care to be taken. This is, and I told you I kind of go off script here, but I just want to point out like an important skill of the GMAT that you have to work on is it's not something that comes naturally. It takes kind of practice here. Um, but it's easy to study content, and that's important. You do need to know the content, but often the skill is the care in your thinking and the ability to stop yourself from jumping to a quick, easy conclusion. And that is a practiced mindset. But if you're just studying for content, if you're not looking at how you are thinking and how you're working through a problem, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to continue to make mistakes and avoid and step into traps like this. Now, of course, I might miss this question and then I'm blowing smoke, right? That makes me look really silly, but I think I got this right. And I think it's a good example of like, look, I was about to step into the trap and you're never not going to almost step into the trap. I don't think. I think everybody almost steps into the trap, even people who are really good at this test. But the uh, strong GMAT test taker realizes they're kind of rushing, realizes that they need to look a little closer and just hold up. Did I really avoid that trap? Where really is the era? Is it really here? No, that's period. Where's the era? Oh, it's here, right? Okay, so I'm talking a lot unknown and I'm not moving forward, but I do think this is a really important point to make. And so this skill, it goes way beyond graphs. This is a skill that happens in math problems, various situations in data insights, various issues in the reading comp and the critical reasoning. It's underlying a lot of the question types. So here it's showing up in graphs, but this is a thing that will help you just for the test broadly. Okay, so according to the diagram, the beginning of blank, one of the periods or eons, marks the onset of a new eon, era, and period in geological history. Okay, so eon, era, and period. So I'd love for Cambrian to be one of the answer choices because that looks like it's a start of a new eon, a new era, and a new period. And it is a choice. So I'm going to select it. And let's confirm. Okay, great. So I got it right. So I was correct in that first situation. Also, do note that for questions like this, you have to get both of these right to get credit for this question. If you miss one or the other, you're doomed. Now, I do think that the second question was a little bit easier than the first if you've taken the time to understand what this graph tells you. And that's often the case. There's often like kind of a freebie and kind of a humdinger. And so you have to just make sure you get both to get credit for a problem. Okay, another graph. This one much more familiar, right? This graph doesn't make me immediately go, oh my God, what is this? You know, panic. And by the way, when you have that moment, just take a breath and read the information, you know, figure out what that graph tells you, understand that you're not supposed to know immediately what it is. Figuring out is the challenge and just embrace that challenge and figure it out. This one is a more straightforward graph. It looks like it's showing me something about age and mass. It looks like it's about a Tyrannosaurus Rex, you know, age versus mass, that's fine. And I can just get a general trend because trends are nice. It looks like it stays kind of a slow mass, and it kind of shoots up, and then it doesn't grow too much anymore. Great. Hypothetical math of a T-Rex up to 30 years, 12, 16, and 20 respectively. Okay, select that. Okay, so two options here. For the masses and integer values, 12 to 20, the average mass falls approximately between what? 12 to 30, excuse me. So this is asking me to put some statistic knowledge into this. I want to go from here to here and determine what the average mass is going to fall between. Let me kind of get a sense of what those ranges are. 2,000, 3,000, 3,000, 4,000, 4,000, 5,000. And what I mean, this gets, I have to get kind of a theoretical, I need to make sure I have a theoretical understanding of averages here. Okay, I think the trap is to kind of put it right in the middle, right? To be like, okay, well, we start at 1,000 and we end at 5,500. And so the average is, you know, roughly between those, which would be 32,000 or so. But I don't think that's going to be the answer because averages skew towards where the weight is. You can think of an average as the balance point of a set. And so I'm noticing that for these 10 years, the balance point is really at 5,500. And for these 8 years, so similar weight, the average is kind of spread evenly. And so the average is going to be about the middle of those. It's going to be about 3,000. Right? So I basically have half the time my average is about 3,000, and about half the time my average is about 5,500. And so if I have half my time at 3,000, and that's again the average, and half my time at 5,500, my overall average is actually going to be between these two, and that's going to be about 4,300 or so, right? 9,500 divided by 2, 4,700. It's going to be about 4,700. So yeah, 4,005. I don't have to be that specific. It's going to be between 4,000 and 5,000. Okay. So that required me to apply some knowledge on statistics. We have some free GMAT prep hours on statistics sets and what's called the weighted average and the teeter-totter approach to things, which I think is a very helpful understanding to have for this question. So yes, it's graphs, but I'm having to pull in other knowledge sets from my studies to get this question right. The percent change, so here's a percent change question. From 12 to 16 is so that's from here to here, A to B, is what the percent change from 16 to 20. Okay. So I need the percent change. So that's basically 1,000 to 3,000 pounds. So that is 1,000 to 3,000 is a 200% increase. Okay. So that's the first. And then from 3,000 to here, which is about 5,000, that is a 67% increase. And so I'd say this is about 3 times as much. Okay. I'm pretty good at figuring out percent change pretty quickly. That's something that's worth doing. If you watch another free GMAT prep hour called All About Percents, I go over an exercise that you can do to get really good at stuff like this quickly. Okay, now let's make sure I got it right. Okay, I did. Good. Notice all, okay, so here's also a funny thing. Notice all this crap. I mean, it's okay. That is the formula for percent change. And you definitely want to know the formula for percent change. But notice I didn't do any of this. I did none of this to get the answer. And that's really helpful because I don't want to have to do all this stuff. If I can do quicker math by a deeper understanding, I'm going to save a lot of time and heartache. Okay, so that's just, and often they kind of give explanations that are like, yeah, it's right. And yes, it is a way. But you want to look, excuse me, you want to be studying not just for what is the right answer, but what does someone who's really good at this test do and think to get to the right answer quickly? And very rarely is that the way the textbooks write the answer explanations. So don't study just those. Don't make sure you try to go beyond those. Try to be better than those. There are often ways of doing it and ways of thinking that get you there faster. Okay, so that's just another little tip as you study. All right, so this is our first table question. Um, percent of population visiting selected cultural institutions in a single year. Okay, so we have different countries, different cultural institutions, and what percent of the population visited them. Okay, so I first should note that these will not add to 100. They shouldn't because, you know, the same people can visit a public library or these, excuse me, going across will not necessarily add to 100 because the same people could visit several of these. I could have 60% visits all of them, and then that's way above 100. So that's one thing I note. Nor should these add to 100. These are different countries moving down. It is also worth noting about tables. I didn't mention this, but you can sort them. Like I can sort these alphabetically by country or by the percent visiting a public library or by a zoo or the percent, right? So I can sort them. It's a 1 degree source. You can't like sort by one and then another metric. That'd be nice for those of you that are Excel wizards, but it doesn't work. You can just sort by one metric. Um, so for each of the following, explain which would help explain if true, help explain some of the information in the table, otherwise would not help explain some of the information in the table. So I guess they're going to give me some scenarios, and then I want to know if it would explain something in the table, likely a trend, right? If some information explains why so many more people visited an aquarium and zoo in Brazil, but not a science technology museum, right? Why is this 28%? This is 4. Well, there was a huge ad promotion in Brazil to go to the zoo. So this is kind of a critical reasoning exercise mixed with some data. Okay, so the proportion of Brazil that lives within close to at least one museum is larger than that of Russia. Okay, so I want to compare museums, Brazil and Russia. So Brazil museums is here and here. At least one museum is larger than Russia. And so Russia is here and here. Um, and so does this explain, so this is 11% and 7%. Might this explain why a higher percentage of Brazilians go to museums than Russians go to museums? I mean, these numbers are not drastically different, but I think I'd still say yes. If the situation was reversed, I would say no, right? If a proportion of Russians that live closer to a museum was higher, I'd say that this does not help explain this. But since it's a little bit higher in Brazil, maybe proximity is what explains that. So I'm going to say yes. And just again, I have to get all of these right. And I don't think I've ever seen a 4-parter. How strange. Usually it's a 3-parter, but I believe I need to get all of these right to get full credit here. Of the countries and places on the table, Russia has the fewest natural history museums per capita. So let's go by history museums, and Russia is indeed the lowest. So if they have the fewest museums per capita, that might explain why they are the lowest. They have the lowest proportion that goes to the museum. I'd say yes, that would help explain that. Of the countries, the 3 that spend the most money to promote their natural history museum are also those in which science is most highly valued. Huh. I'm already skeptical of this one. because it would involve a lot of assumptions here. The three that spend the most money to promote their natural history museums, I don't know that that's these three countries. There's no reason to know that the highest money spent at a natural history museum causes a higher proportion of your culture to go there. So I'm already skeptical of that. Even if it did, I do notice that, well, oh man. Yeah, I don't think this is too out of scope. I just can't, that's data that I just don't know. On the GMAT, you really want to be careful of making big assumptions and even some little assumptions. You really want to just go by like, what do I know for sure? Science and technology museums are less popular than other cultural institutions in the majority of the countries on the table. So this is kind of to be asking like, does this explain why these are always lower, right? But if these are ever higher, which they're not, so yeah, that would explain this. If that would explain why these other cultural institutions get a higher percentage of attendees than the museums do. I think I'm going to say that that would help explain. So I'm going to say confirm and let's see what I did. Okay, good. Got this one right. Okay. All right, there's another table question. The display of Brazilian agricultural products in 2009. So here are the products that Brazil makes. Here's the production of the world share it makes. Here's its rank in production. Here's the exports. It's percent of exports that Brazil is responsible for. And I guess this is just then this is the rank of the exports, right? So they export 22% of the world's beef and they're number one. And they produce 16% of the world's beef and they're number two. So I'm already noticing there's like some tension here. Notice another tip. Don't try to understand everything at once. Understand one thing at once, and that might actually help you understand everything at once. So this is not an uncommon standardized test prep strategy. Here I'm just understanding the first line because it's going to help me understand the table, right? I've zoomed in on one thing. I'm not trying to understand anything else. The other thing, or on a math question, sometimes you might have a number, you might have a question that asks about the 10,000th number in a series, but you might spend some time on the first, second, third, fourth numbers of the series to figure out something about those first, right? Just sometimes going simple will help reveal the global picture here. So I'm noticing didn't mean to do that. I'm noticing maybe some tension between what percent they produce and what percent they export, perhaps. Orange juice, for instance, right? They produce half of it, but they export 82% of it. That might tell me something about their consumption habits, right? If they produce, maybe, I don't know. I'd have to think about that really carefully before I jump to too big a conclusion here. So let's go to the statements. And again, you don't want to spend too much time mulling over this. You get a general sense and you go to the questions. So no individual country produces more than 1/4 of the world's sugar. That seems to be true because Brazil produces 21% of the world's sugar and they're the number one producer. So anyone else produces less sugar. So I can say that yes, no one produces more than 25% because the number one produces 21%. So that's a yes. There are countries that export a greater, and again, this is a good example of like, hold up, how do I know? We don't have other information here. We only have the one country. How am I supposed to know about other countries? Well, you can make inferences from the data they give you. Also, another thing I shouldn't skip here. I like to point out what the columns mean because the columns can mean different things on different questions. Here, yes means the statement can be shown to be true. No means the statement can't be shown to be true. And I just want to be careful here. What that no means is not just false. It also means there's not enough to know. Sometimes you have to think about that. There's a yes case, and then there's a no or I'm not sure case. And sometimes there's a no case and a yes or I'm not sure case. So I like to specify exactly what my columns mean before I move into the questions here. There are countries that export a greater percent of their coffee crops than does Brazil. So coffee, they produce 40% of the world's share, and they're 32% of the exports, and they're number one. There are countries that export a greater percent of their coffee crops than does Brazil. I want to say I'm not sure. Because notice it's a percent of the crops, not a percent of the world's share. So for instance, if I'm a country that makes little teeny coffee, just a little bit, it's 1% of the world's share. But I export all of it, then I export 100% of my crop. And that's a higher percent than Brazil does. But I wouldn't show up, I wouldn't beat Brazil on these metrics, right? Because I don't produce a big proportion of the world's share and I don't have a big percent of the exports, but of my own share, I've exported it all. So this is just, I don't have enough information to say. Okay. And so this is again careful thinking. It's easy to jump like, oh, they're number 1 and 1, so Brazil must win this. But think about what the question asks, and this takes me back to something I emphasize on percent day. What percent are you getting? What is the percent rooted on? This is a percent of the coffee that the country produces, not the percent of the world share or the percent of the world exports. And so that's a percent that's not in this table, and I just don't know. Yeah, I feel pretty good about that. Of the commodities in the table for which Brazil ranks first in world exports, they produce more than 20% of the world's supply. So here I'm going to sort by exports, and I'm going to look at all the ones that rank first. And then I'm going to check that they make over 20% of the world's supply, and I already see that they don't, because chicken and beef are less than 20% of the world's supply. So I think I can say no here confidently. So this first no is an I don't know no, and the second no is a definitely not no. I actually have information that contradicts this. If Brazil produces more than 20% of the world's supply, it must be the world's top exporter. Okay, so this is kind of a flip, and it doesn't always have to go like these two don't have to be the same answer. Here I want to sort by world supply and find the ones that are above 20 and see if they're the number 1 export. And they're not, but they could have been. So I can say no again, not because I said no the first time, but because there is an exception. Okay, so I'm going to say yes, no, no, no. And that is correct. All right, this is a graph question, and this is another good example of like kind of a weird graph. I mean, it looks like a Venn diagram, so I'm somewhat familiar with Venn diagrams. But it's definitely not a line graph or a bar graph. Okay, but let's see what we're showing 30 years or older and no high school diploma. So these are people who are older than 30 without a high school diploma. Each one is 10 students, so that's 50 people, I guess. Okay, so this is at Central Community College. There's 300 total. Okay, so if one student is selected from the 300, the chance the student will be under 30 or a high school graduate or both. Under 30 or a high school graduate or both. So there are 30 of these dots because there's 300 total. So how many are under 30? That would be everyone outside of this circle. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's 14 out of 30 are less than 30. Or a high school graduate. So that's everyone outside of this circle. Well, so this is 100%. That's not a choice. Under 30 or a high school graduate or both. Huh. It's everyone except these 5. It's everyone except the people who are older than 30 and don't have a high school diploma. So that's 25 out of 30, which is 5 out of 6. Okay. Yeah. So the first one, under 30, means outside of this circle. The second one, high school graduate, I'm sorry, shoot, means Under 30 means outside of this circle. High school graduate means outside of this circle. Um, and then it says or both, right? And so I'm basically saying everyone but these 5 people. And so that's going to be 25 out of 30, which is 5 out of 6. If one student is selected at random from the 300 surveys, the chance will be both under 30 and a high school graduate. Okay, so under 30 and a high school graduate. So that's this group. Because these are all over 30. These all don't have a high school diploma. So that's going to be the one, I think it's 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's going to be 1 out of 3. Okay. And if one student is selected at random, the chances will be neither under 30 or a high school graduate. So they're over 30 and they're not a high school graduate. Notice I'm switching the negative. If they're not under 30, then they're over 30, and they're not a high school graduate, then they don't have a diploma, basically. And so that's these people. So that's the 5 out of 30. That's the 1 out of 6. Okay. There we go. All right. And that was the 5. It's not a very robust data set. I apologize. But those are the ones they gave us. Okay. And so it gives us just a little flavor. I still had a chance to talk about some of the, I think, some major skills that this test tests, and some major minds, some big mindset you want to have. And again, notice that I spent some time up front, always just grounding myself in the problem. Yeah, so we had the graphs were medium, hard, and hard. So this first graph was medium. It's kind of surprising. That seemed like a pretty difficult medium. Okay. This one was considered hard. You know, I thought this one was easier, but I bet you people really stumble on that first average question, is my guess. And that causes some issues, right? There's probably a kind of a bloodbath on that one question that causes this to be hard. This one is also considered hard, and I thought that one was probably the easiest. So again, this difficulty is always a little bit subjective. The table questions were both considered easy. Yeah, that makes sense. These table questions were not particularly difficult. Pretty straightforward table questions. Kind of a sneaky inference on that Brazil sugar one, I thought, you know, but generally pretty straightforward data. So nothing too terrible there. Okay. But that just, you know, that shows you what I think. I was exposed to these for the first time. How do I move through them? Oh, that's the wrong. No, that's it. How do I move through them? What am I noticing? What am I thinking about? And just what are some big GMAT stuff that lurks underneath these questions? Reminder about our free material, check it out. And if you're looking for upcoming courses, you can go to that link, see the schedule, see what's coming soon. We will wrap up this series soon. All I have left are the multi-source reasoning questions, so keep an eye out for that. We do these once or twice a month. We'd love to see you out at some of them. And again, we'll keep finding things to talk about, but we have a full library available to you on YouTube. I encourage you to go there and work through it. I mentioned some videos today that I think helped me, the mindset on those videos helped me get some questions right today. So check them out. And yeah, hope to see you out next time. Until then, best of luck on your studies.